Well, welcome back, everybody, to the energy tips for week 41. That is the October 6th till 12th, 2019. Yes, it's correction time. If you've watched the energy update, you already got the gist. It's about toxicity. It's about re-evaluating, correcting, going into feedback, learning our lesson, and watching ourselves and hopefully also others grow. The overall medicine here for next week is balance, bringing things into more balance. Why? Because when we are off balance, when we are off our center, then whatever it is that affects us from the outside or inside can make it worse. And there are several aspects to this. There's the inner balance in regards to masculine and feminine aspects, the masculine and feminine approaches to things. I'll just rush through this here real quick. Masculine balance is the getting, the going, the having, the owning, the directed action. And the feminine approach is giving more space, nurturing, being patient, and taking care of ourselves. So these things need to be brought in balance. It's of course no surprise to us that most of us are, stuck in, this doing more and doing harder and running around like fire putter outer. So that's the masculine approach that needs to be softened up, that needs to be balanced out. We need to bring more calm, more balance through giving ourselves more space. And we're going to be looking at all these different levels on which we can give us more space. In the Awakening Essentials special here for this week, I want to talk about toxicity, what it is, and how we attract it into our lives, and how we can prevent this from, being this continual contamination of ourselves. So stay tuned. A lot of cool subjects here. There are some aspects that I mentioned in the energy update about fighting dragons, a spiritual warrior, and so forth, that are very strongly coming in right now. I suggest that you listen to the October forecast. I go a little deeper into this. But where all this is leading here, guys, apart from some of our inner dragons, right, and some of the stuff that comes forward, that comes into truth, that comes into illumination when we really do this evaluation, is that we recognize what these pillars are of growth, these pillars of freedom that we all need for more balance. All right, and I'm going to give this to you here in a shortcut version, just so that you understand where all this is coming from when I talk about roadmap and navigating through our life and through our growth and transitioning, and all these things are part of understanding the primary needs, the primary values of what it actually is that we are moving towards, whether we do this consciously or unconsciously. And it's very simple, guys. It's truth, it's light, and it's love. Those are the three main pillars of our growth, of our healing, of our self-actualization. And when it comes to freedom, the specifics about freedom can only be brought in if we are willing to surrender some of these coping behaviors that we've adopted to in the course of our life. And you guys already know this because you feel the prompting in you, but it is the deeper inner connection with yourself, the oneness, the wholeness within, and also seeing other people as true selves, the oneness. And then at the same token also the willingness to go into interaction, the synergy, seeing ourselves being in the same boat and doing and striving for the same things. And the empathy that you bring in as energetically sensitive, the empaths, want ready or not, you already bring this in. How to deal with this, how to work with this. So next week, as I said in the energy update, beware yourself of overreacting, of going back into this narrow mental programming that we all have, these hardwired things, these set beliefs. They're very, very narrow and typically link you into black and white thinking, to all or nothing. And as most of you already know, that is where your ego's duality is hiding, and that is how it actually dominates you. That's how it runs your life, through making you believe that there's only, black or white solutions to things. And when we talk about higher vibratory solutions, those kind of options that we begin to see when we recognize that we actually have a choice, they cannot come to us. We cannot see them when we are in these lower vibratory states that the ego promotes, that the ego enables. Not because the ego is bad, it's the ego's job to help us cope with things that potentially are threatening or that are potentially creating trauma. The problem with that is, as we will see here in the special about toxicity, that what we accept as normal often is intrinsically toxic. And therefore, our ego's ability to detect toxicity is basically gone. And that's why the perception and the way we perceive our reality, this navigation that I talk about, this roadmap that we all need, plays such an instrumental role. All right? Without your inner heart's navigator, you cannot know what is life degrading, especially if you have experienced a lot of trauma, if you've been victim of abuse, narcissistic behaviors, codependency, addiction, mental illness, and so forth. So we're going to look into this a little deeper here. But this next week will bring in a very, very strong prompting for you to listen to your soul's language. And a lot of these things might not make sense. That's why it's very important that you give yourself more space. And also that you evaluate what, your reality sort of produces for yourself and how far that is even, growth promoting. And I can promise you one thing, that this energy that is coming in here in this next week is extremely supportive for your efforts. It's just that you have to be willing and have the courage to consequentially act on what it is that you are seeing there once you illuminate things a little more. And the moment you're willing to surrender them, the moment you're willing to let them go, something new, something better, something bigger is going to come in. So it's this old saying, in order for more doors to open, you have to close an old door. So focus on the new that can come in, the growth that can occur once you let go of some of your hardwired, some of your preset, some of your conditioned ways. And then you're going to feel a huge uplift, a huge momentum that will help you to better understand why your manifestation in the past was so restricted, why the growth here couldn't take place, or how you've restricted yourself, how you self-sabotaged yourself. All right, so it's a very optimistic outlook on next week, but it requires you to go in with the truth, the love, and the light that can show you what needs to be healed, what needs to grow. All right, it's just going to pop open for you if you do this. What are the energy centers that are primarily affected here next week? It's continued our first chakra that brings up karmic stuff, that brings up the old unresolved wounds in us, and also with it all the coping mechanisms. So it's a week maybe where addictions are going to flare up a bit. Again, I'm going to talk about this. At the same time, we have this really strong fifth chakra impact now. So everything that has to do with expression, creativity, giving space, okay? This is regulated in your fifth chakra, and it's pushing into your third eye, okay? And that's where, this calibration with truth has to take place. This is also where you will be able to see new options, new chances, okay? To redo something or to start new, all right? but your fifth chakra is going to feel impaired, so it's not really coming forward yet. You feel a little bit, sort of impeded again, okay? And that can lead to you, going into fantastical thinking again, or going into unrealistic expectations. That's the seventh chakra that is a bit overreactive here next week. That's why I talked about conspiracy theories and the neuroticism of that, like being like sort of in this the total black and white type of attitude. All right, these will all impede you. These will all work against your growth, against your manifestation. All right, collectively, it's very clearly visible right now how this is leading to outbursts of neurotic behavior in some of the world leaders. But you got to understand, this is all fear-based. This is all fear-based, and the fear is valid, okay? But it needs to be worked with, all right? The fear is about the banks crashing, or the economy crashing, or the political stuff that is going on. The fears about, losing some of our comforts, losing maybe some of our relationships, losing some of our pride. Then, what is being done to prevent this? Tariffs, trade war. This makes no sense. Can you see that? It just creates more of that. All right. So, same with within our relationships, where we, start withholding more, or where we start becoming jealous more, or we're doing things that actually promote all the very things that we are afraid of, or the very things that set us off balance. So, but there will also be some accidents on a larger scale. So, not to make this look like a positive thing, but surprise events, okay, that will kind of rip people out of that toxic cycle. All right. So that's my hope, that something happens that is of such magnitude, be it in regards to the planet, or be it in regards to the economy or politics, that it actually makes people wake up and recognize that they have to work together, synergy. That this is basically a self-selection process, that we really need to recognize that we all need to step up. Also, clear signal here for the crypto lovers amongst you. Yes, this is the time. All right. Physically, how are we going to feel this? Okay, many of you are going to have throat issues. Okay, just in general. Throat and ears continued. Nervousness, your spinal cord, your nervous system is spiked up again. All right. But you're also going to feel this in your hips and especially lower back. So I'm expecting those of you who have a tendency for this, to maybe have issues with herniated discs or something, also hip issues, any kind of skeletal issues that show disalignment. Okay, so you're going to have to work on calming down, on taking more time, and always ask yourself, is there a more balanced approach? Do I need more masculinity? Do I need more direction? Do I need more action? Do I need to come out of passivity? Or is there the feminine approach that is needed? Do I need more softness? Do I need more space? Do I simply need more self-nurturing? As physical exercise, stretching will help you, because it increases your flexibility, it increases your ability, to maintain your balance on all your physical levels. Emotionally, you got to be careful here. Anxiety can come back in, and this overreacting can, this can be a response to other people that are venting, but this can also be something that you feel within yourself, because it's not really coming out. The fifth chakra is not allowing you to really express this correctly, and so it can lead to some of these emotionally or emotional projection, those push-pull mechanisms that I've talked about before, resentments and so forth, turning into a victimizer, where those, say, boundaries of who is the victim and who's the perpetrator, where they are no longer that clear anymore. Also, jealousy and this possessiveness can come in here this next week. So you really got to be careful, because what you are actually, afraid of losing, or, in some cases also where you perceiving grief about, losing, that you have lost, is really just a letting go of your fantasy or letting go of a certain ideal. All right. So instead of getting dominated by that, guys, just ask yourself, what do I truly need? And give yourself more space, period. In the Mental Heart Fusion Marathon, we found out it takes about 1.5 seconds, okay, from, experiencing something to having a thought about what you're experiencing, like an interpretation. And then about 6 seconds until you get emotionally attached to what it is that you're experiencing. So my tip is calm down, breathe. Obviously, breathing, is also a physical exercise, but you all know I am breathing is also an energetic exercise, is also an emotional release tool. Okay, breathe 1.5 seconds at least. Okay, that's 1 or 2 deep breaths just to touch down with yourself again. And then stay there, hold this for roughly 6 seconds and watch what happens with your thoughts and how your thoughts create emotions. And just let all that go and say, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. This is just my mind interpreting what I'm sensing. And I don't even know yet what I truly feel or what I truly need. So 6 seconds, guys, really all it takes to get out of anxiety. Obviously, there's also a physical response to that, but the physical response comes from the mental and emotional attachment. All right. Mentally, but be careful here with being pulled into superiority, into, entitlement and selfishness, because this next week comes with that. Most of you are not selfish per se, but you have a tendency to have this sort of mental OCD, to turn every stone, to overthink, to over interpret, to to ruminate about things. So, redirect this energy into really looking at your true beliefs. What is the true belief underneath this thought, or underneath this opinion, or underneath this belief, or underneath this emotion, if you will? Don't allow yourself black and white thinking, okay? Catch yourself, call yourself to order and say, hey, isn't that a little black and white? That's not very sophisticated. It's not mature. It doesn't promote growth, okay? Socially, big week for relationships. Yes, you can imagine with all these other things going on that I've already talked about. Big time testing, evaluating, and hopefully renegotiating. These rules of engagement, especially for us energetically sensitives, even if we've already been able to sort of no longer be attracted to toxicity, but we have to work on them, because, as we are going through our own self-discovery journey, there are more and more things that we realize, such as clutter or noise, how they negatively affect us. And these things all need to be communicated. The other might not know this, all right? You are changing, you are growing, some of your needs are changing, and this needs to be communicated. That's why, fantasy bonds and where we sort of hang on to this ideal of relationship that is mostly conditioned through the collective makes no sense. Another big thing in relationships is, for those of you who are at the beginning of this, is to investigate what you are accepting as normal, and if this is perhaps toxic, what you're perceiving as normal. There are many reasons why the ego cannot detect this, because as soon as it's familiar to our ego, it doesn't really see it as a threat anymore, because it believes that it can control it, it can handle it. And how does it handle it? Through coping. And what is it that impedes, or that that impedes our growth? It is, thinking things are normal. All right. So go through this evaluation in a soft way. Give it a lot of space. Maybe write things down before you talk to your partner, or before you just vent and yell and storm out. Okay. This will help growth. If you're younger, then of course, a lot of things you simply don't know yet, because you haven't experienced them. And it's very important that you experience this for yourself, but you can also learn from others. So go into feedback with this. Ask others if they think that's normal. Not normal as in the morally normal, but if this is okay or not. Chances are you cannot detect if something is degrading or berating to you simply because you grew up that way. All right? Spiritually, guys, this is all about surrender here next week. This passivity that I talked about, you leaning back and just consuming all of this. This includes all my videos and workshops too. It is not enough. This energy here in this next week, while it asks you to go into more space and calming down, which is more of a feminine approach, it also asks you to step up. I talked about self-selection. Spiritual growth, spiritual freedom is a process of self-proclamation and self-selection. Okay? The power that comes out of your maturity, such as wisdom, for instance, comes through you stepping up. And how can you learn to step up? You need to surrender and trust and allow yourself to experience, to internalize, because that then helps you to discover and let go of all these things in your life that you've been externalizing, that really aren't your beliefs, that really aren't your values. Okay? So don't just sit there and consume, guys. You need to start feeling what you are here for and who you are so that you can grow. Okay? More reading, more listening, more watching energy tips is not going to do it for you. Okay? You have to put this into actualization. And next week will still be a little bit tricky because, our 5th and 6th and 7th, they're a little confused. Okay? Then give yourself more space. Ethically, guys, all this here that I'm guiding you through is the school of higher spiritual awakening and spiritual freedom. All right? Learning to understand your soul language, learning to speak with your soul, learning to appreciate your true self, and embodying being a true self, living in truth, okay? This is the ultimate growth. And it comes through, truth and freedom and love. These are the things that you need to value higher than anything else, okay? So what is toxicity? Let's look into toxicity here and what it is maybe that contributes to toxicity in our life, and maybe what it is that we do to enable it. That's consistently questioning our reality or ourselves and accepting growth, preventing behaviors such as, expressions of moodiness, anxiety, anger, and all these coping mechanisms that are being generated through that in ourselves and others as normal, whether we are aware of it or not. It is the consistent and slow contamination, undermining, degrading, or harming of inner balance and inner self-awareness, of inner freedom, generating these coping behaviors in ourselves and others that prevent growth. Now, as I mentioned before, there are some things such as just simply being young and unexperienced, that make it more difficult for us to discern things and to understand, what is okay and what isn't. There's also, like exposure, one of the biggest external factors, where we just karmically been born into situations that are just toxic in and of itself. And if that's all we know, this discernment is very, very difficult. That's why I added the what we accept as norm here to the definition. So it's the lack of experience or maturity, the lack of discernment, and a missing roadmap, a missing navigation tool, a missing purpose. These are the three main reasons why we accept toxicity. But in the core of it all is the the disconnectedness from ourself, from our true self, our true feelings, our true needs, our true heart's desire. What causes toxicity, or what can cause toxicity in our lives? There's external and internal factors. And it's of course very complex, but I'm just going to zoom through here, okay? External factors are exposure. I mean, if you live in a toxic environment, even, you know, if it is contaminated through actual poison, you know, be it chemicals in, you know, food, chemicals in cleaning materials, chemicals in your house, you know, obviously, you know, over time, this compounds and will, you know, create toxicity in you. But the same applies, of course, to emotional toxicity. You know, if you're surrounded by people who are extremely negative, who are extremely emotional, say, or irritable or unpredictable, all right, that create a feeling of unsafety, insecurity in you, okay, then that's a toxic exposure, all right. And mentally and spiritually, exposure can also mean that you have been indoctrinated, okay, that you are being exposed to a set of very narrow beliefs, okay, that you've never actually checked yourself. Other external factors are also things that we all know too well. Is distraction, you know, when we constantly get distracted through just like, you know, other people's dramas or the drama of living, or right now it's a lot of uncertainty in the world, okay? So distraction can, you know, really, you know, mess with this perception of normal and what is toxic and what isn't. Depletion, you know, you all know this adrenal fatigue that we all have, this like being completely drained at the end of the day, does not allow us to discern correctly. Obviously, if we are in environments or relationships where there's a lot of crazy making, no, I didn't say this, where there's gaslighting, you know, that you might have not even detected yet, you know, then this can also be a reason, you know, an external reason why you don't have the ability to discern. Okay, then there's addictions. Addiction is a huge factor for toxicity, not just the drug or the med itself. All right, addictive behaviors. And you all know we also look at the ego in and of itself as an addictive structure in us. Mental illness, unfortunately, mental and also physical illness. So if we are caretakers, if we are surrounded by people who are very ill, this also can lead to toxic exposure. And if you are a caretaker, you need to listen very, very carefully, because for you, everything that is being said here and that I suggest for you to work on basically counts tenfold. Because if you voluntarily put yourself into this place that you work with other people's toxicity or illness, especially mental illness, guys, all right, then you really got to know who you are. You really need to know where your center is. You need to know how to self-clear. You need to know how to do this very quickly, because you're in constant exposure of this. So medication can also do this, and of course, you know, certain behaviors that other people have, such as OCD. People who are extremely controlling, all right, can create an environment for you that limits your freedom, even though they say, oh, no, of course you have the right to choose whatever you want, but, okay? So here are the markers of how we internally allow or enable or even promote toxicity in our lives, and what balance we need to look at. For instance, so most and foremost, this is especially true for empaths and energetically sensitives. There's this fear of confrontation. We have this fear of big emotions. And so on this scale, on this sliding scale, we fear the most when somebody vents. But at the same time, this also makes us suppress a lot. And therefore, it happens too that we vent. And that is, you know, something that promotes toxicity because it doesn't really allow growth. So we never actually get to the place where we can resolve issues together. Another internal factor is the unrealistic expectations that we have towards ourselves, towards our partner, towards our relationship. Often also, accompanied with an idealization or some kind of idea of perfectionism. But at the same time, we also feed self-degradation. We also feed this hyper vigilant criticism about ourselves or the other. Criticizing, therefore, is also something that enables or attracts toxicity in our lives, whether it's criticizing the other and totally focus on, all the things that the other needs to change, or this questioning, this constant questioning, constantly sort of, rehashing and ruminating about things. Another aspect is the guilt tripping that we do either consciously or unconsciously, or that is being done to us. And the other end of that scale is the self-berating, is the constantly feeling responsible for everything, constantly feeling like we've did something wrong, constantly trying to find the mistake with us. This is one of the reasons why gaslighting works so well with us empaths, because we already constantly search for the fault in us. We already are willing, to assume that it's us. Okay. Another aspect is the shaming. Many of us have shame attachments from our childhood. It's part of our trauma. And so when somebody comes in with somewhat of a shaming attitude, how could you do this or something like this, all right? It like literally sets out all common sense in us. But the other side of the scale is the self-bashing. This comes from this seeking the mistake within us, and often produces behavior patterns such as victimizing. So we feel this huge injustice, but we don't really speak up out of the known fear of confrontation or the ramifications of speaking up, namely venting or big emotions. And we eat this in ourselves, we eat it in, and therefore, we feel victimized, and as a result of it, we're forming resentments inside, and we secretly take a revenge, maybe by withdrawing or by little, sarcastic remarks here and there. You got to watch this. Victimizing is a huge, huge phenomenon amongst people who are empathetic and who tend to swallow a lot from others. Then next we have the neediness, all right? This clinging and this constantly wanting to have reassurance, constantly wanting to have physical contact, constantly hovering, always texting and so forth. But at the same time, on the other end of the scale, the withdrawing. So it doesn't matter which part it is we're doing. We end up doing both to a degree, but we never really do this without the extremes. There's nothing in between, and therefore all these patterns that I'm listing here, there's more, they all promote toxicity because there is no resolution, no healing, no growth possible. Another one, and again, this is a huge one, is passivity, is to let things happen, to not do anything about it, to just, to see it. It's not that you guys can't see it, to let it happen and to withdraw, all right, instead of doing something about it. But on the other end of the scale is also this over-responsibility, feeling responsible for everything, sort of becoming sort of a helicopter person, constantly doing everything for others. That's the other side of the scale. You got to understand that. And this, of course, has, issue or shows issues with boundaries. So toxicity really, in essence, is an issue of connectedness and boundaries, because going into the extremes of these things that we are discussing here always leads to toxic coping patterns. All right, so for instance, going into indecisiveness with things because we ruminate so much that we can't ever come to a conclusion, or we have so much fear of messing things up or losing things, right? is, really on the other end of the scale, the same as overthinking things, the same as, constantly rehashing and reiterating the pros and cons, but never actually going into action. You can see here, right, how this also relates to these feminine and masculine approaches that I mentioned in the beginning. OCD is one of the things that I want to point your attention at. It's something that many of you have developed, or you see this in your partners, that is almost glorified. It's almost cool to be kind of OCD about certain things, right? And it's so widespread nowadays that nobody actually thinks there's anything wrong with this. But if you actually look at what OCD really does to a person, and where it's rooted, it's fear-based, right? It's over-controlling everything. And it's funny, maybe, the little quirks that we discover. But really, this isn't funny. This is also a lack of boundaries. And this can breed toxicity in a relationship if one of you guys is really OCD, or both. I've seen a lot of relationships where both are OCD about certain things. And all these other patterns that I mentioned here then become a part of this, all right? With this is, of course, the control here that we exert, and many of you are not aware of this, but, guilt tripping somebody, or, having this secret or silent resentment towards somebody, the things that I describe as victimizer type of behaviors, those are actually forms of covert control. So it's one thing, to be with someone who obviously tries to control us, who tries to control our life, who forbids us to read certain books, or, be part of certain groups or activities. That's one thing. But there's the other side of that scale is, covertly controlling what other people do or what they like by judging it, or by degrading it, and or minimizing it. Not to mention, of course, the minimizing of emotions, of feelings. All right, so to literally judge or comment on how other people feel. We're not just a victim of this, guys. You have to pay really, really close attention how many times we are more or less telling other people how they're feeling, or how they're supposed to feel, or how they're not supposed to feel. This has a lot to do with those mental beliefs and these hardwires that we accept. Another thing is not being aware of things, not actually being aware of the needs that we have, not being aware of things that deplete us, all right, and not expressing them correctly. Or the other end of the scale, this oversharing, this over-expressing, and constantly pulling the other person into your drama, what you don't get, and so forth. And of course, there's also guilt tripping. It is covert stuff linked to this, all right? There's so much that goes on without us being aware of, where we actually invite toxicity into our relationships, into our lives. That explains why you keep attracting certain things, why there's so much replay and repeat. In a separate video, I talk about energetic projection, energetic push and pull, all right, and why we tend to absorb other people's energies. Well, the reason why we absorb other people's energies so much, beside the fact that we have, sort of more fine-tuned tools for that, is that we project more, okay? So an energetic projection is, can be felt by the other person, but if their tools aren't that fine-tuned, if they don't really know what is going on, they won't really know what it is that is being projected on them, and they will try to, basically counter-project this onto you. So a lot of times in this extreme, we get hit, we absorb our own projections, guys. We just use the other person as a mirror. And that's a form of abuse too. So I want you guys to be fair there. It's easy to criticize other people by looking at how they reacted in this moment and so forth, but it's really important to look at our own push-pull mechanisms. One big reason, and probably the The biggest here, coming from psychology, is trauma and trauma memory, and how we suspect things, how we go into the replay of our trauma, be it emotionally or mentally, or sometimes even physically. So when someone has experienced trauma, even complex trauma, this cannot be controlled really by the person. So we go into this type of behavior where we're kind of skittish, where we kind of secretive, where we're protective, and where we're defensive, where we walk on eggshells, where we, do certain things because those are the things that we've adopted as coping mechanisms back in the days when we were little. But now we're more mature. Now we have more power. Now we have more options. And we need to take a good look at this. Oftentimes we need a third party, like a therapist or a coach, to help us to see this. These are blind spots. Another thing, and this is something that I've noticed, especially here in this new age sort of spiritual community, is the misunderstanding or lack of sacredness. There's an over-interpreting of signs, the numbers, and getting fixated on this. So a fixation on something that is sacred, that is, mystical, that is telling me something, okay, without actually having the maturity to understand what it truly means. This is very difficult to discuss here because it really depends on the situation, but I think you know what I mean. It's like trying to see something in everything. This can also be, fantastical thinking. This can be magical thinking, and is not very healthy. All right. So we need the proper roadmap to know what these things mean. And you hear me talk about this a lot, the inner lexicon of sensations and feelings and emotions. We have to form this roadmap ourselves. We have to do this as part of our self-discovery and awakening journey. Nobody can tell us what this means, okay? But to fixate on things like I'm seeing numbers everywhere, or I'm seeing colors everywhere, or, and then to, read up an article that says, oh, if you see this, then it means that. That's not very mature. That's not promoting growth. That's not something that will actually help you. It's something that restricts you. So overall, it is the problem with toxicity is that it really comes down to our ability to connect with ourselves, with our true feeling, with our true sensations, emotions, and thoughts as well, and to witness them, and then to become better to express them. Our emotional vocabulary needs to be built. Our energetic vocabulary needs to be built so that we can refrain from these coping mechanisms that we've accepted as norm, okay? And that's then what breaks the cycle. That's then what will prevent you from, attracting those kind of partners or those kind of relationships or, work relationships into your life, all right? I know this is a lot, guys. Just remember that spiritual freedom, okay, this is what this ultimately is all about, comes from the willingness, courage, and ability to discern what it is that you're experiencing. Because if you can't do that, then you can be manipulated. Then you can, buy into or will buy into illusions. And the only way to do this, guys, is to really work with your true self. All right. This is it for today. I'm wishing you a wonderful week. I hope that this gave you a few guidelines as to what to reflect on. And I would love to hear from you what you discovered in the process of your self-discovery and your self-growth. Please share this here in the videos. Please share my videos, guys. I have thousands of people watching those videos and like 4 likes. I'm not sure if it's because you don't like what it is that you are seeing. Or maybe it is. I'm not going to change what I say just so I'm liked more, but I have a feeling that this is about, not really being aware that here too, this is a mutual exchange. All right, so I need a little more feedback from you guys. Have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you for supporting transcodes. Thank you, Heart Warriors, for being such wonderful troopers. Bye bye.